Welcome to Perspectives from HSBC. Thanks for joining us. And now, on to today's show.
Thanks for joining today's episode of our Perspective series. I'm Tian Lu, CEO of HSBC Qianhai Securities, and I'm delighted to be joined by Yimei, CEO of China AMC, one leading asset manager in China. So let's start, right into the questions. Yimei, what's the megatrends you are seeing in China's asset management industry?
I think there are definitely a lot of things going on in asset management industry in China. And one really is this year, I think, will be a comeback year for equity investments. And also at the same time, we hope will also be a good year for active investments. And if you follow Chinese market, and you probably know that in the past several years, well, especially ETF products is really taking the lead in the market. And there has been a lot of arguments or even doubts about really active will continue to generate alpha. And also people have been really not very confident in the equity investments. So I think this year probably going to be a very different U-turn in a lot of the past trends. And this definitely is going to be front and center in the development in the asset management industry. Well, the big picture certainly is that how well can you invest in China and how our wealth generation will continue to create opportunities to the whole wealth management in China.
So Yimei, let me ask a question on macro outlook. We have a lot of things on the doorstep, in particular with the National People's Congress got underway in March earlier this year. Against the backdrop of some trade tensions, some economic headwinds, there are also some policy supports being announced in that session. So what are these policy supports and how has the market reacted to that?
Yeah, I think everyone actually has really been keen, I think 2 weeks ago, to really look into the policy support from our two national sessions. I think, well, it's very clear that we have a very full support from our central government, especially on the whole economy re-energized side. Yeah. And we can see that the central government really target again the 5% growth, which I do think is one of top growth around the world, right? Even though people always have certain higher expectations for China. It's like your kids already in school and ranking top and you just want them to win the Olympics and then again and again. So I think the central government really are targeting a very healthy growth rate for China. At the same time, we have been seeing we raised the fiscal deficit ceiling to 4% and 1% increase from last year. And that really is a huge support from the government side to deal with the current, a lot of lingering issues in, local debt and etc. Yeah. So at the same time, we have seen the continued support of the central government on the innovation side, on the infrastructure side, and at the same time also trying to boost the consumption from the local Chinese people. All that in play, I think, are the very strong support for going forward economy, I think, coming back, and at the same time for the capital market.
I know you also have a very strong view on China's technology industry and potentially products around our theme. So is there anything you can share around that?
My theory is really that China is very much like a large manufacturer model. When we say large language model really is the new trend for AI, and we've seen that all the training, all the data feeding into the large language model, and finally emergence happened. For example, the open AI moment, and we've seen that all the data, all the training really pushed the AGI to be a possibility. And if you think China as a whole, China's manufacture and technology as a whole, if that could be one model in the past 40 years, I think all needs and all the manufactured products, data around the globe actually were training China. Yeah. And then now I think the emergence really happened so that people were shocked that we have the DeepSeek moment. Yeah. People were shocked that we have a robotic moment. So I do think that technology in China is entering a different phase. And as value investor and fundamental analyst in China, we are not surprised because this is what we have always believed in. For China AMC, in the past 3 years, we launched so many active funds and also ETF funds, themed and also concentrated to the investment in technology and in the next generation of technology. And that, I think, going forward, investors will enjoy the growth in that area in China. We are very excited.
Yeah, I think one narrative is that a lot of investors used to see the pressure faced by the private sector, private entrepreneurs in China. So many of them were like, hey, the DeepSeek moment, that's how could that happen?
Yeah.
Of course, the new narrative is that it really shows that the animal spirit of the private entrepreneurs is still here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I do think that DeepSeek is also one showcase that all the young people in China, and their dream is not to follow. Their dream is really to lead, to be one part of the contribution to the whole leading forces in the human generations. So I think it's our way to contribute back because we actually benefited from so much innovations around the globe. And now it's our time that we can be part of that leading force. It's so exciting.
Yeah. So next topic, given we are in Hong Kong, Hong Kong is a super connector in the financial world for China and the world. And we know that, in the last sort of couple of years, there's been a lot of mutual access and so-called cross-boundary products, ETFs, Wealth Connect, and also, mutual recognition funds. How much can that further go in your mind? Do you see like more Connect schemes? And what's the opportunities for you for China AMC?
Well, we certainly are very, very excited. Well, we has been really one of the big beneficiaries of such Connect program because China AMC, we have been one of the largest multi-asset manager in China. We have now 2.8 trillion RMB AUM. And we have been like, our version of saying it is like we are like the Legos in the asset management industry. Yeah. And we are building all the building blocks like in Legos to build different asset classes and even micro asset classes so that our wealth management partners or asset allocations can utilize them to build customized portfolios for our end investors. So Hong Kong really was front and center in the internationalized process of our asset creation and asset allocation. It's so important to us. So the past 10 years, all the Connect schemes were really very useful for China AMC and the whole asset management industries to get access to international asset classes, to international, different opportunities. So now for China AMC, we use certain Connects as we are the largest, ETF provider for Hang Seng Index, Hang Seng Technology Index, Hang Seng, healthcare index. So we were one of the largest, I think, index creators in China to utilize the Connect scheme. And going forward, I think for Chinese wealth management, the more internationalized, the more asset classes we have accessibility, I think the better portfolio will be for our end investors. Because for one single country, single class is too volatile for our investors. And that's why the investors were not being able to hold on long enough to our instruments, right? So I think definitely we are looking forward to use Hong Kong as our center point in internationalization of our investment capabilities, in the internationalization of our investment vehicles, and also alternative vehicles as well, because we were the first one to launch the first batch of Bitcoin ETF last year.
That's right.
Yeah, and this year we also launched our tokenized money market fund in Hong Kong, which is so exciting as well. So we really hope that the Connect scheme will be more and more broader, and the quotas will be bigger, so that it will fit into the huge appetite for our wealth management for domestic Chinese investors.
Yeah. So let's switch back to the investment themes. So we talk about technology, which you are very positive about, and China AMC has always been an investor, a long-term investor in the technology sort of industry and theme. And the other one is consumption. We've already seen some, I guess, repricing happening in the consumer sectors, but also with the Consumption Promotion Act being announced very recently. What more are you expecting? Do you see opportunities in China, consumer space?
Definitely. I think Chinese people, well, we both share our genes from our Chinese heritage, that we are very prudent people. So when spending, I think because we came from, well, not poverty, but a long term of really starting to accumulate wealth. So I think the consumption idea is quite different generations by generation. And from this time, the Ne Zha movie, that is a huge, hit around the whole country. You can see that's the record high for one single market around the globe. So this shows how big our consumption market could be just by one single movie, right? So I think consumption really is something that people, when they are comfortable, when the wealth creation and the wealth reserves are enough, I think people start to be more comfortable in investment and at the same time in consumption. And certainly this time around, I think the subsidies from the government also play a great role. And then you can see that consumption in the past quarter this year actually is already picking up. And from the Spring Festival, all the headcounts in travel and only, I think it's also record high already. So this time around, I definitely think it's a long term. It's not something just happened overnight, but we see the grand trend in domestic consumption to start building up year by year.
Yeah. So you just talk about wealth creation, wealth accumulation. Wealth is a driving force in asset allocation. I've got some numbers. So one estimate is that $92 trillion of new financial wealth is to be created between 2023 and 2028. And also Asia countries contribute to 30% of that. How is the wealth creation shaping China AMC's pipeline?
Yeah, I think the ultimate goal of every single asset manager really is to be able to create value for the wealth of the general public, including retail investors and at the same time institutional investors. So for our, I think, long-term vision is really to be the best wealth manager on top of being the best asset manager. Because in China, I think it's a very different ecosystem than for example, in Hong Kong or even in the US, because I think there are so many financial advisors in developed countries. But in China, I think when people buy one single product, in their mind, they are buying a solution. So it's not just about one single product if it's an instrument. So for China AMC, we are not going to just be the Lego, all the instruments creator. At the same time, we need to be able to build different, architectures or superheroes or cars with our Legos, right? So we want to be able to customize solutions to our end investors, no matter it's retail investors for their pension, for their education, or for our institutional investors for their longer investment objectives. So we not only want to be the asset manager, we need to be able to transform into wealth manager at the same time. So the end solution, the asset allocation, and the way to customize ourselves to suit the needs, I think is going to be our major, objective and strategy in the future.
And talking about building blocks or products, exchange traded funds, ETFs, you are one of the largest ETF providers in China. and ETF, is an area we are seeing enormous growth. Again, I've got some numbers here. ETF AUM crossed 15 trillion globally in 2024, and there was a record inflow of ETFs globally, $1.88 trillion US dollars. In addition to that, there are cross listings which are gaining momentum. In fact, earlier this year, I think you shared that you are waiting for approval to launch a cross-listing ETF in Brazil, which will be the first in its kind. So talk us through the opportunities you are seeing on that product.
Yeah, I think you're right that ETF is one of the most important building blocks within our multi-asset platform.
Yep.
And ETF certainly has a lot of advantage because it's low cost, it's very transparent, and then it's very easy to use in asset allocation because it's so stable. So ETF has been one of the most popular instruments, I think, globally.
Yeah.
And in China, the development rate is so high. I mean, the first trillion RMB in ETF takes, guess, 70 years.
Right.
Yeah, and the second trillion took only like less than 3 years. And the third trillion took like 10 months. So this is how fast the whole ETF market has been growing in China. And I think now it's not just domestic ETFs. Like going back to the wealth management, going back to multi-assets, going back to internationalized asset allocation. We want to introduce more asset classes, more diversified instruments into Chinese market. So your Brazil case is only one of them. So we also actually, years ago, we launched one Japanese ETF Connect in China. And probably we are also going to include more and more by region, maybe also by sector, and also by different value chain to create different asset classes for our end investors.
And also for the benefits of the listeners, we talk about some of the cross-border ETFs. Actually, in addition to the one you talk about with Brazil, that's been Saudi Arabia, Japan. You talk about there's also sort of Singapore, but there are also growing interest in thematic ETFs. Internet, semiconductor, AI, and so what's your outlook for the year ahead? In terms of thematic themes, you're expecting that international investors and mainland investors, will rally around.
In the past several years, the growth in ETFs really mainly came from the major indices like CSI 300 because the market was going down.
Yeah.
So I think long-term investor really took opportunity to make asset allocation investment in within very low market capitalization. Yeah. But this year, since the market rebounded and we've seen a lot of movements into the technology sector, I think it's quite naturally the thematic ETFs, especially rallied around technology, will be front and center in a lot of investors' minds. And I will just give you one example. We actually launched our robotic-themed ETF like several years ago, and it was so small, no one was paying attention. So it was even less than 100 million RMB in AUM. Can you imagine that small?
Yeah.
And then in the past half year, because of the robotic movement and innovation in China, and this one single ETF raised into more than 10 billion RMB just in half a year. So you can see how fast investors actually are reacting to all the innovations and technology advancement. And we do think that it's not just about one thing. It's going back to the China being, the motivated leading force in all sectors, cross-board in technology. So we are very much looking forward to this year. A lot of the thematic funds actually are going to be quite popular both for domestic investors and for international investors. At the same time, thank for the stock and ETF Connect, a lot of the international investors actually can have access for our thematic ETFs in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And I do think that HSBC is a great partner for China AMC in the past, so that together we created so many different instruments as well. So we really hope that this year is going to be quite a good year for our thematic products, including ETFs and active funds.
Yeah. While talking about robots, we actually, have a few robots actually just behind us. So I really hope, I wish, our listeners, could be here at our scene. That's actually all the time we have today. We talk about policy support. We talk about the vibrant technology industries in China. We talk about the opportunities for China asset management industry, in particular for our, leaders in the industry like China AMC. On behalf of the listeners, I'd like to thank Yimei for your participation in our episode today.
Well, thank you so much for giving this opportunity, and I hope this year we will all have a very good year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Perspectives. Make sure you're subscribed to HSBC Global Viewpoint to stay connected